Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. Because of the lack of time that we have this morning for our webinar, we will start promptly, which is now. So welcome to our third episode of the DORA series that we've had since the DORA framework came into play. And today we are going to talk about the much anticipated batch 2 that was released in the summer this year. So our webinar is going to be divided into 3 parts. We are going to give you a short overview and a recap of the DORA framework itself, followed by a detailed overview of batch 2 technical documents that were released, and this will be conducted by my colleague Magdalena Mihalcia, who is also on the call with us today. And lastly, we will give you practical implications for your organization in terms of how you can make sure that you are DORA ready by the deadline, which is January 2025. And at the end, you will have a chance to do a Q&A session. However, during the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Before I start, I would like to let you know that this webinar is going to be recorded and is going to be available for you to view afterwards on our website, along with the other episodes of the webinar that have been uploaded already. So without further ado, before we start, let me remind you that DORA is not just a one-time silver bullet. That if you comply with it, that is the end of your regulatory journey. Basically, it is a continuous journey and a continuous monitoring and update that is required by the regulation itself. In terms of the DORA deadline and the timeline that was provided to us, it is let me remind you that it is a very sector-specific framework, mostly focusing on the financial sector. It was implemented on the 17th of January 2023, which was last year. And then there were technical documents which are known as RTS and ITS that was released in January this year. That was batch 1, after which there were a second set of technical documents released in July. And what are these technical documents? These are basically documentations that give you more information on the general framework and the 5 pillars that are included in the main framework of DORA. And finally, those entities that are in scope are required and mandated to comply with this whole framework by January 2025, which is not too far away. In terms of the entities that are in scope, like I said, it is a very sector-specific regulation focusing on the financial sector. And as you can see on the screen, there are a number of kinds of entities that are in scope of the framework itself. However, there is a disparity that you will see. So, for example, in terms of the managers of alternative investment funds or insurance and reinsurance undertakings, etc., you can see in the red box on the right-hand side of the slide that some of them are out of scope of DORA. In order to determine whether you are in scope or out of scope, there is a certain proportionality analysis that needs to be conducted in order to understand whether certain articles from the EU directive apply to your organization or not. Then, in terms of the 5 pillars that I spoke about within the DORA framework, the reason why I say the first one is a governance framework is because since the financial sector has always been under the regulatory watch of the local regulations, they already have a framework in place. So in order to build upon the already available framework, the organizations are mandated to do their proportionality analysis and look at their security posture, based on which they would need to do a gap assessment related to the DORA requirements within the framework. The 5 pillars, mostly the first 2 are related to the ICT risk management and incident reporting, as well as the digital operational resilience testing, which is one of the main points that were related to in batch 2 that was released in July as well this year. And then most importantly, there is the third-party risk assessment as well, which is quite a big pillar that organizations need to do a risk assessment against. And lastly, there is an information sharing pillar, which is at the moment not a compulsory one, but organizations are asked to share information in terms of their threat intelligence on a voluntary basis. Now, in terms of bringing everything into perspective and giving you an overview of the difference between the main DORA framework that was that came into play last year as compared to the batch 1 and batch 2 of the technical documents that were released earlier this year and during the summer. As you can see, those elements that are in the red box are related to the 5 pillars that I just mentioned that are a part of the DORA framework. And like I said, the technical documents that were released in January, which are known as batch 1, are the ones that you can see in highlighted in the green box, and they're mostly related to the risk assessments, whether it is ICT internal risk assessment or related to your third-party risk assessments. And then in batch 2 of the RTS and ITS that were released in the summer this year, you can see that they are highlighted in blue and related to different chapters within the DORA framework, mostly related to the incident reporting and management, as well as some of the templates that were released. And also they give a bit more information on the digital operational resilience testing that is mandated for some of the entities that are in scope of DORA itself. And now we move on to a little bit of more detail on the technical documents that were released as part of batch 2 of RTS in July this year. So I will hand over the floor to my colleague Magdalena to give an overview of that. So over to you, Magdalena, please.
Thank you, Sabika. So my name is Magdalena Mialse. I'm Senior Information Security Manager working for Grant Thornton Luxembourg. So the first RTS we will discuss is the one on subcontracting, which is specifying the elements which a financial entity needs to determine and assess when subcontracting ICT services supporting critical or important functions. This RTS sets out requirements when the use of subcontracted ICT services supporting critical or important functions is permitted by the financial entity and sets out the conditions applying to such subcontracting. And in particular, the RTS requires financial entities to assess the risks associated with subcontracting during the pre-contractual phase. This also includes the due diligence process. And the RTS sets out also requirements regarding the implementation, monitoring, and management of contractual arrangements regarding the subcontracting conditions, ensuring that the financial entities are able to monitor the entire ICT subcontracting chain. Moving to the next slide, as for the implementation part, the first step involves identifying subcontractors that play a key role in your business. These are typically subcontractors that deliver essential goods and services to your main contractors that handle critical functions. After identifying the subcontractors, we move to risk assessment and due diligence. The goal is to identify any potential risks that could affect your business operations or reputation. Once the subcontractors are assessed, you will need to update the contractual agreements accordingly. This step ensures that the terms, conditions, and the legal obligations are clearly defined to mitigate any identified risks. Finally, a continuous monitoring process must be put in place. This helps ensure that subcontractors maintain compliance and performance standards over time. Regular audits and performance reviews and compliance checks will be part of this monitoring. Moving on, before entering an agreement with an ICT third-party service provider to subcontract critical or important functions, a financial entity must assess the following. The first one is due diligence to ensure that the ICT third-party service provider has robust processes to evaluate the operational and financial capabilities of potential subcontractors, including participation in digital operation resilience testing. The second one is subcontractor identification. So the ICT third-party provider must inform the financial entity of any subcontractors in the chain and provide all necessary information for risk assessments. The contractor compliance is to ensure that contractual agreements with subcontractors enable the financial entity to meet regulatory requirements, including granting the audit, inspection, and access rights throughout the subcontracting chain. Providers, resources, and controls. This means that the ICT third-party service provider must have adequate expertise, resources, and security standards and risk management structures to effectively monitor its subcontractors. Entities monitoring capabilities. The financial entity must also have the necessary resources and controls in place to oversee the subcontractor services, including risk management, incident response, and business continuity. Subcontractor failure risk. The financial entity must assess the impact of your subcontractor's failure on the financial entity's digital resilience and financial stability. Location risks. Evaluate the risk related to the geographical location of subcontractors, especially when services are provided from third countries. Concentration risk occurs when a financial entity relies heavily on a single or few third-party providers for critical services. If that provider experiences an outage, a failure, or a cyber attack, the impact on the financial entity can be substantial due to the lack of alternative providers or maybe even backup systems. Audit rights. You have to identify any barriers to audit, inspection, or access rights for authorities and the financial entity. Financial entities are required to regularly reassess these risks as their business environment, the ICT threats, or the geopolitical factors evolved. Moreover, entities cannot rely exclusively on the risk assessment provided by the third-party vendors. They must conduct their own due diligence to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements. Moving on, when preparing written contractual agreements with ICT third-party service providers, financial entities must explicitly specify which ICT services supporting critical or important functions are eligible for subcontracting, along with the conditions under which subcontracting is permitted. These contracts must include the following key elements. Responsibility. The ICT third-party service provider remains responsible for all services provided by subcontractors. Monitoring obligations. The ICT third-party service provider must monitor subcontracted services to ensure all contractual obligations are continuously met. Reporting. The provider must report on the performance of subcontractors, ensuring transparency toward the financial entity. Risk assessment. The provider must assess the risks related to the subcontractors. data allocation. The contract must specify where the subcontractor processes or stores data, if relevant. Subcontractor obligations. Subcontractors must have reporting obligations towards the third-party provider and where agreed toward the financial entity. Continuity assurance. The third-party provider must ensure service continuity throughout the subcontracting chain, including business contingency plans and service level agreements. Security standards. The provider must include ICT security and additional security requirements in contracts with subcontractors. Audit rights. Subcontractors must grant the same access, inspection, and audit rights to the financial entities and authority as main ICT provider. Notification of changes. The financial entity must be informed of any material change to subcontracting arrangements. And finally, termination rights for the financial entity in case of unacceptable subcontracting risks or breaches. Moving on, when allowing the subcontracting of critical or important ICT services, financial entities must ensure the following conditions are met within their contracts with ICT third-party service providers. First of all, the chain of subcontractors must be identified and keep up to date to maintain an accurate register of information. Financial entities retain overall responsibility for monitoring the subcontracting services, ensuring that ICT risks are continuously assessed and mitigated. This monitoring may rely on information provided by the ICT service provider. Contracts must also allow the financial entity to evaluate how complex subcontracting chains impact its ability to monitor and manage services effectively and meet regulatory obligations. And finally, contracts must ensure financial entities can access information about subcontracting agreements and relevant performance indicators, enabling them to monitor compliance with regulatory requirements. On the next slide, when there are material changes to subcontracting arrangements, the financial entity must ensure the following. First of all, the ICT third-party service provider must inform the financial entity in advance with enough notice to assess any risks posed by the changes, including their potential impact on the provider's ability to fulfill contractual obligations. The third-party provider can only implement the changes once the financial entity has approved or raised no objections by the end of the notice period. If the financial entity determines that the changes exceed its risk tolerance, it must inform the third-party provider of the risk assessment results and request changes before modifications are implemented. Also, a financial entity has the right to terminate its contract with an ICT third-party service provider in the following cases. If the ICT provider proceeds with material changes to subcontracting arrangements despite the financial entity's objections and requests for modification. If the provider implements material subcontracting changes before the end of the notice period without the financial entity's explicit approval, or if the ICT provider subcontracts critical services that are not explicitly allowed under the contractual agreement. Moving on to the second RTS, we will discuss it's on the incident management. This slide outlines the 3 stages of incident reporting: initial notification, intermediate report, and final report. Each stage requires specific information to ensure the proper handling of incidents. In the initial notification, key details include date and time of detection, a brief description if any affected member state is in scope, how the incident was discovered, and whether a business continuity plan was activated. In the intermediate report, you should provide more details, including the incident type, the restoration of activities, threats or techniques that have been used, impacted areas, and actions taken for recovery. And in the final report, it focuses on the resolution details, including the root cause, any costs or losses, financial recoveries, and whether the incident reoccurred. Moving on, the initial report must be submitted as soon as possible within 4 hours after the incident is classified as major, but no later than 24 hours after the financial entity becomes aware of it. An intermediate report must be submitted within 72 hours of the initial notification, even if there are no updates. If regular activities resume earlier, an updated report must be submitted without delay. The final report must be submitted no later than 1 month from the submission of the last intermediate report. If the incident occurs over a weekend or a bank holiday, the deadline is extended to noon on the next working day. On the next slide, financial entities shall use the template in the Annex 1 to submit the initial notification, intermediate, and final report. And they also must ensure that the information provided is complete and accurate. If precise data is unavailable at the time of the initial notification or intermediate report, the entities should provide estimated values based on available data to the best extent possible. When submitting the intermediate or final reports, financial entities must update any relevant information previously submitted. And the third and the last RTS we will discuss is on threat-led penetration tests. This RTS specifies the types of entities that are in scope of TLPT. As you can see, only those entities with a certain level of systemic importance and sufficient ICT maturity are required to carry out a TLPT. Competent authorities retain the option to require the largest and most advanced entities to exceed the minimum elements outlined in this RTS, which sets the baseline requirements for conducting TLPT under DORA. Also, TLPT authorities shall evaluate whether financial entities not mentioned in the slide should be required to perform TLPT, considering their impact, systemic importance, and ICT risk profile. Moving on, as for the testing methodology, the first the TLPT authority assigns a TCT, test coordination team, to oversee the TLPT activities. They designate test managers to ensure compliance and provide feedback throughout the test phases. Financial entities must appoint a control team lead and restrict TLPT information to necessary staff. They should manage incident responses, maintain secrecy, and consult test managers before involving their operational teams or the blue teams. Control teams need to assess risks associated with testing live systems, including potential impacts on financial stability. Proper risk mitigation measures should be documented and the exceptions should be reviewed thoroughly. In joint TLPT, each financial entity performs its own risk assessment. The control team of the designated lead entity must coordinate with other control teams to manage joint risk effectively. And finally, moving on, in the preparation phase, the financial entity must submit TLPT documents within 3 months. They must establish a control team for communication, risk assessment, and scope definition. And they should review risk management and get TLPT authority validation. In the next phase, in the testing phase, the financial entity must analyze threats and propose test scenarios. The control team selects at least 3 scenarios based on recommendations and feasibility. Next, in the testing phase, the red team testing lasts 12 weeks. The plan is approved by the control team and TLPT authority, and weekly reports are provided while secrecy is maintained. In the closure phase, the red team report is submitted in 4 weeks, the blue team report in 10 weeks. Feedback is exchanged and the final report is submitted within 8 weeks. The remediation plan must be submitted within 8 weeks, covering shortcomings, priorities, and risks of implementation. That's all on my side. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. That was a very comprehensive, detailed information on Batch 2 RTS and ITS that we received in July. Thank you very much for that. Now, as you saw, that DORA requires proactive preparation to meet the requirements and to ensure that the entities that are in scope have the operational resilience that is required by the framework itself. And implementing DORA's requirements can be overwhelming because it is a big framework, and you only saw a part of it which was released in Batch 2. It requires a lot more than what you saw in this particular episode. Therefore, knowing where to begin can be difficult for an entity. But on the screen, you can see that we have recommended 5 practical steps that entities can take to become DORA ready. Now, as you can see, the first one basically talks about doing your proportionality analysis and understanding the principle of proportionality depending on your size, the risk profile, and the business structure, as well as the business objectives that you are working in. Afterwards, performing a holistic gap assessment based on the 5 pillars of DORA that you saw initially in the beginning of the presentation itself, and bringing together all the stakeholders that would be involved in doing the gap assessment. So it is not only your ICT teams that can do the gap assessment, you would need to involve your other teams, which could be your compliance teams, your legal teams, your information security teams, etc., etc. And please do not forget that the accountability should come from the top. So your top management is responsible and accountable for proper compliance with the DORA regulation. Then after doing the gap assessment comes the remediation of gaps. Please do make sure that your gap assessment is aligned with the risk assessment, with the risk register that you have in place, and align those gaps that have been flagged in the assessment to the risk register that you have, and also prioritize which gaps need to be addressed before the other ones. And please bear in mind that if you are an organization that has not had any gaps in the gap assessment, then I must congratulate you, but that is most probably not going to be the case, because all the organizations and entities that we have worked with have had gaps, no matter how resilient their security posture is. Because DORA goes into a lot of detail and in-depth analysis of various requirements that are mandated within the framework itself. And the fourth recommendation that we do is that please document each and every step that you take, whether it is doing your proportionality analysis, whether it is doing your gap assessments, and how you are going to remediate. So basically, your remediation plans should all be documented, giving an oversight of how you have aligned these gaps and recommended remediation with your risk profile of the organization and the entity in scope. And lastly, when we talk about testing resilience regularly, it is not about whether you are in the scope of the TLPT exercise mandated by DORA or not. Even if you are not in the scope, if there is a major change in your ICT infrastructure, DORA asks you and mandates you to test those changes regularly as part of your pen testing programs that you have in place. So if you do all of these, then hopefully you should be ready for the next step, which is compliance in January 2025. If you are not, this slide provides a very clear overview of the consequences of non-compliance under DORA. As you can see, the first one shows the cease and desist orders, which means that all entities that are considered as non-compliant would have to halt their regulatory violations immediately. There can be temporary or permanent cessation of non-compliant activities. Furthermore, the individual fines can go up to 5 million euros, and organizations are also susceptible to fines that go up to 5 million euros or 10% of their total annual turnover. And of course, there is a reputational impact whereby there will be public disclosure of the violator along with stating the nature of the violation. So the consequences, as you can see, of non-compliance are quite grave. So there are only 3 months left, but according to the readiness survey that was done recently by the CSSF here in Luxembourg, and according to the results that we have seen, which were published publicly, most of the organizations here in Luxembourg are at a good level of being ready for the deadline, which is January 2025. However, how can we as an organization, we as Grant Thornton can help you with your compliance journey? We are very proud of the fact that we are the pioneers of developing a digital tool that gives autonomy to our clients to do the gap assessment and the subsequent remediation related to DORA framework themselves, or of course with the help of the team here at Grant Thornton. We have clients who have used our tool to do their gap assessment and the consequent remediation related to it, as well as we do have clients who we have helped along their journey of compliance so far. Since, as you can see that, and most probably you already know that DORA framework is huge, but the tool helps to efficiently navigate through more than 900 requirements that are in the framework itself. And as you know, that not all entities in scope have 900 requirements applicable to them. There might be some requirements that are not applicable to their environment. So what the tool does is that based on the selection of the kind of entity that is done in the tool filters through the more than 900 requirements of the DORA framework, including batch 1 and batch 2 of technical documents, and only gives the entity those requirements that are applicable to them. So that part is already done when you are using our digital tool. Then it gives you a point-to-point questionnaire with a 4I principle of verification to ensure that when you have the auditors come in, you are covered from all angles of compliance. And at the end of the tool, which is the major feature of the tool itself, you get 2 kinds of reports. One is basically a visual representation of your compliance status in terms of where you are for the compliance against each of the requirements within the different chapters within DORA. And the second and most important report is a remediation plan that is provided to you based on whether you have selected if you are partially compliant or not compliant with a certain requirement within DORA. The remediation plan gives you a step-by-step instruction of what you need to do in order to be fully compliant with that specific requirement within the DORA framework, whether it is the main framework or the batch 1 or batch 2 of the RTS. Then in terms of the security features of the tools, of course, we have segregation of data for each of the client. If the client chooses to do the gap assessment themselves using our tool, we as an organization do not have access to the client's data at all. However, if the client asks consultancy services from Grant Thornton itself, of course, we will have access to their data, but in a segregated environment. There is authentication with multi-factor authentication on the tool itself. There is versioning and audit trail. And we can, if you want to have more information on how the tool works and how it can be applicable to your specific environment, we are happy to set up a separate meeting with you in order to see how the tool works and give you a specific demo. However, just to give you an overview of how the tool works, I will reshare my screen with the sound included, and I will show you a short demonstration of how the tool works itself.
Are you ready to take control of your compliance process like never before? Look no further than our cutting-edge DORA tool, the ultimate solution designed to empower you every step of the way. With DORA, you're in the driver's seat. Whether you prefer a hands-on approach or seek expert guidance, our platform offers unparalleled autonomy. Take charge of your gap assessment independently, or let our team of seasoned professionals lend their expertise. The choice is yours. But that's just the beginning. Picture this. At the conclusion of your assessment, you receive not one, but two invaluable resources. Firstly, a visual snapshot of your firm's compliance status, providing instant clarity and insight. Secondly, a comprehensive remediation report, meticulously crafted to guide you through your compliance journey with ease. Experience the transformative power of DORA today and unlock a world of compliance efficiency like never before. Don't just meet standards, exceed them with confidence with DORA by your side. Your compliance journey starts here.
So that was the end of our presentation. I hope that you got an insight into the batch 2 of RTS and ITS and what requires you to do and what steps you need to take in order to be compliant with the requirements that are mandated within that. And also we gave you an overview of what you should do as an entity in scope, what steps you need to take in order to be ready for the compliance deadline, which is January 2025. And now we are happy to take on any questions that you may have. I'm not too sure if we have any questions in the chat. Okay, we have a comment from Alessandro. Okay, so this is related to the financial entities that are entering into contractual agreements with their ICT third-party service providers. And the question is, how can we determine the criteria since, for example, DORA says nothing about ISO 27001 certification in terms of whether the ICT service provider is providing data to the highest quality and information security standards. So perhaps, Magdalena, would you like to take this question as to how to assess the criteria?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, the DORA regulation doesn't mention anything about the ISO 27001 certification because I think they don't want to be too restrictive. Not so many organizations have it, and even if they don't have the certification, maybe they are actually following the certification requirements. So they cannot be excluded just because they don't have the certification. But yes, you are right. Having a certification in information security really helps in assessing their readiness towards the applying the DORA regulation. If they don't have a certain regulation or a certain certification, you can use your own internal due diligence questionnaire to find out if they are ready or not. DORA is also DORA regulation is also specifying some specific points that need to be added and considered while you are performing the due diligence. And of course, you can have you can use any other framework of available on the internet or in the cybersecurity community for this purpose.
Yes, and I think, like Magdalena said, due diligence is really important, and due diligence can be performed based on various standards available in the market and also the requirements that are mandated within the DORA framework itself. And the second question that is coming from Alessandro is, can pen tests and other services be billed to the customers by the ICT third-party service providers as a separate service? I think it would depend on your contractual agreements that you have, whether your clients agree to it or not. This would all depend on a case-by-case basis. Would you like to add any comment to it, Magdalena?
I fully agree with you, Sabika. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we have a question from Emmanuel. Does the DORA tool include the batch 2 elements? Yes, like I said before, showing you the short presentation of the DORA tool itself, the DORA tool includes the 5 pillars that are mandated within the DORA framework, as well as the RTS and ITS requirements from both batch 1 as well as batch 2. So everything is included in the tool itself. Regarding the tool, could you provide high-level pricing example if using the tool only? So we have, that is a very good question. We do have a pricing strategy that we have put in place for clients who would like to use the tool only as compared to those clients who would need assistance in terms of understanding the framework. And it is a very small fee that we charge for the access to the tool. But of course, we can send you the related information, Emmanuel, via email. I have noted that down and we will send it to you. And then we have a question from Hervé. Thank you for attending, Hervé. The outsourcing part of ICT subcontractors seem to completely match the CSSF Circular 22806. Does it mean that this part is normally already performed for everyone in Luxembourg, or did I miss something? So this is a very good question, and I think this was raised in the questions that were asked to the CSSF as well in the recent event that took place in terms of providing the results of the readiness survey. And what CSSF said is that yes, that absolutely most of the CSSF circulars that have been released do relate and cover most of the part of the DORA framework itself. In case some of the requirements are not covered within the circular itself, then please note that DORA framework takes precedence over the CSSF circular. And these CSSF circulars will be revised, and CSSF is working on them in terms of including the missing requirements if there are missing requirements within the circular, into the circular itself. So yes, if the CSSF 22806 covers all the requirements related to ICT subcontractors, then you should be covered. In fact, Luxembourg, because of it being a heavily regulated industry, most of the organizations are at a good level of compliance with the DORA framework itself. Okay, then we have another question which says that when advising an ICT service provider, how do you approach the fact that the criticality or importance of that ICT service provider can only be determined by an ESA based on the 10% materiality principle in the RTS? That is to say, given the difference in regulatory requirements, on the basis of this determination, do you advise them to comply only with simplified ICT service provider requirements, or do you try to anticipate their qualification as critical or important? So Magdalena, would you like to take this question first?
Yes, thank you, Sabika. So indeed, it's harder to determine if you are qualified as a critical or important ICT service provider. Of course, you know your role in the market. So if you have a strong feeling that you'll be appointed as critical or important, you can start and go ahead with the full regulation, with the regulatory requirements applicable to the critical ones. If not, if you're a small entity or you feel that you're not sure, you're at the borderline, we advise you to start with the basic requirements, and afterwards, following the decision, you can move on to the other requirements.
I agree with you, Magdalena. You would need to have measures in place to show that you have a resilient security posture. I think this is mandated not only by the DORA regulation itself, but also by other regulations that were released by the ESA. I hope that answers your question. Thank you. One of the questions that I would like to shed some light on is the TLPT question, which is the major question that a lot of organizations are concerned about, whether they are in scope of TLPT or not. Like you saw in one of the slides that were presented by Magdalena, there are certain organizations that are already defined as those that will be a part of TLPT. However, that is not a hard and fast rule. So as the ICT infrastructures of different organizations change over time, if initially they were not in the scope of TLPT, because of that major change and because of the criticality of that change, they may be in scope of TLPT in the future. So please note that if you are not in scope in the first round of the TLPT, for those entities that are in the first round, they have already been informed by the CSSF. But with the change in the IT infrastructures over time, it may be the case that those entities that are not in scope today may be in scope in the future. So you need to have your resilience testing plans put in place and be ready for that as well. So like we said, that one of the steps that you need to take is that whenever there is a change in your IT infrastructures, please make sure that your testing is regularly done regularly done and monitored as well. And also, one of the other questions that are a part of most of the organizations that we have helped in the past and are still working with. It is that what is the level of subcontracting that you need to go to in terms of your due diligence, risk assessment, and contractual amendments. So DORA requires documentations to be collected on all lines of subcontracting. So as you saw in batch 2 of the subcontracting part, that you as an entity are responsible for making sure that you understand who are your subcontractors and you have the relevant documentations in place to show that you are aware of the different lines of subcontracting that you have with third-party ICT service providers. So those were some of the key points that were raised previously as well, and we wanted to address them in this webinar. And let me just check one more time if we have any further questions in the chat itself. Okay, we have one question from Alexander, and he says that is subcontracting also applying for trade repositories that are under supervision of the ESMA? So Magdalena, do we know if this is applying to the trade repositories as well?
If you are in scope of DORA, yes. All organizations in scope of DORA must apply all requirements for subcontracting.
Okay, thank you for that. And I don't see any other questions coming in the chat. Okay, I have another question from Hervé. In case of an incident, who must declare it to the authorities, the financial institution, the ICT subcontractor, or both?
Usually this aspect is determined when you are preparing the contractual agreement. So if the financial entity wants you as an ICT service provider to report the incident, they will have to write this aspect in the contractual agreements. So you'll have to discuss together and reach an agreement for this aspect. If not, the financial entity is the one who has the obligation to report it.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. Then we have another question from Alessandro. He says that, do we know when ESA will define ICT service providers as critical?
I do not have this information. Apologies.
And I think that it would probably not be the ESA, it will be your local regulators within each jurisdiction defining the critical ICT service providers, as well as those entities that would be under the scope of TLPT. But this is not released, I think. By 17th January, beside the ROI, what else should the entities require us to submit? So Tia is asking, beside the ROI, what else should the entities or ESA require us to submit? So I think at the moment, I don't think you need to submit anything by January 17th. You just need to be ready in terms of having all your gap assessments, your remediation plans, and your testing plans in place. So like we showed you, you have to have your documentations, your due diligence risk assessments and gap assessments in place in order to show that you are compliant with the requirements mandated within the DORA framework. But there is no submission by January 2025. Okay. I don't see any other questions. All right. So if there are no more questions, we would like to bring this webinar to a close. You can see on the screen the contact details of Magdalena and myself. If you have any questions, we would be happy to respond to them. And also, if you would like to get more information on how the DORA tool can assist you, please do not hesitate to contact us, and we will be happy to set up a separate call with you and give you a demo of the tool itself and discuss further. So thank you very much once again for joining our webinar today, and thank you very much for your questions, and we wish you a wonderful day ahead. Hopefully
you.
not with the grey weather. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, everyone.